Hey, what's up everybody? It's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and today we're going to talk about the beyerdynamic DT770 Pro X Limited Edition. That is a mouthful. It's a special headphone because it represents a 100-year anniversary of beyerdynamic. This company's been around for a while. They've been making headphones for quite a long time. Started with speakers, and here we are today. Now in this review, I will talk about what makes this headphone special, how it stacks up to some other Beyer products, as well as a couple other brands, just to kind of throw that in there at this price range because this sells for $200. Now this was sent to me for review by beyerdynamic. I have no affiliate creation with this. I was offered to create a page to do affiliate links. Basically, if you end up purchasing the headphone after you watch the video, it will support the channel, but I elected not to do that. I don't want my content to ever come across as just shilling products to make money. I also don't believe that you have to always buy the latest and greatest of everything, because technically with audio, if you get a great audio product, it should last a long time. That is something Beyer is known for, is durability, and we're going to get into all that. So I do want to leave it at this though and ask you all a question. When it comes to reviews like this, if we maintain unbiased coverage, do you think that opening up any kind of marketing stuff or affiliate links can have a negative connotation to the video, or do you think it's better to have that to support the channel? I won't get mad either way. In the meantime, I elected not to gain anything monetarily with this. I will send this back after review, got no money for it, so but I will still have links in the description below to help you find it if you decide to purchase it after watching this. So let's get into what makes this what it is. I already mentioned it has a $200 price range, and it is a closed back, as you can tell by looking at that wonderful ear cup design. It uses a newer driver. This driver was announced last year. It's actually found in the more expensive DT 700 and 900 Pro X's, which are open or closed and open versions. Those are more expensive. They have some different characteristics to this one, but it is nice to see a more expensive driver trickle down into the $200 price range. Another thing that I like over the older 770 Pro is the fact that it has a mini-XLR connection. So it does have a detachable cable. It's a 3-meter cable, so it's 10 feet long. It's rubber. There's no real microphonics issues, but it still feels really robust. Now, the mini-XLR, it shares a ground on both sides, so just on that note, you don't need a balanced amp to make the most of it. Stick to whatever you have. Now, the $170 DT770 Pro does not have a detachable mini-XLR cable, so that's one advantage over it, in addition to having the newer and better driver found in the more expensive headphones. This also has a little detent right here in the headband, which is to help reduce stress on the top of your head, or that pressure point. So by distributing the weight a little bit better, you're going to have better long-term comfort. That's always something Beyer's kind of been known for, is you can wear their stuff for a long time. The pads also help with comfort because you have this amazing breathable fabric material. I can wear this stuff for a very, very long time. It's the same with other Beyer products. There's obviously variances in the pads themselves, but one common characteristic is they are rather breathable. There's still a decent amount of sound isolation. This is rated at 16 decibels of attenuation, so that's how much it should, in theory, reduce exterior noise at a certain frequency. And then when you compare it to the 700 Pro X, which is the more expensive $270 version, that one has closer to 20 decibels of noise attenuation. So it still has pretty good noise rejection. It will lower background noise, but because of this slightly breathable pad, it may not be as isolating as some other closed backs out there. Now, the clamp force is rather light as well. So when you factor in that detent on the top, the very soft and comfortable ear pads, and the slightly lighter clamp, it's light enough where it's not squeezing my head too hard, but I do get a consistent seal. These do have a slightly stronger clamp than something like the Tiger 300Rs, which I also really like, but I can still wear these for a very long period of time. Comfort is definitely a major selling point with this headphone. If you're familiar with beyerdynamic, you should be familiar with this pad shape. It's a circular shape, and it's very comparable in size. These pads are closer to 60 millimeters on the inside edge towards the top, you know, what touches your skin, and then it tapers down closer to about 55 millimeters down here at the bottom. It also gives you about 22 millimeters of pad depth, which is quite nice. So if you're concerned with, you know, fitting larger ears, this should do just okay. You shouldn't have any real issues with pressure. You do have a padded baffle as well, so even if your ears are larger and they do touch the baffle, you're not hitting a hard plastic, which is nice. Now, because the pads are removable, you can switch to any other beyerdynamic compatible pad that's been out there. I actually threw on the Wicked Cushion Freeze pad just to try it out, and this isn't a bad pad. It has a nice breathable fabric as well, but it's really hard to beat the beyerdynamic comfort in terms of breathability, so I don't know if you'll necessarily need to switch pads purely from a comfort reason, it will definitely change the sound quality, but it's really important to know that if these just wear down, just get a new set and you're good to go. Now, Beyerdynamic is known for durability, physical durability. These headphones should last you years and years, if not decades, if properly taken care of. Now, it has a spring steel headband as well. You can see that the pad can kind of unbutton and expose that spring steel band. You also get a little bit of articulation too, which is nice. So you get that rotating on the cup, and then this will kind of turn a little bit to conform towards your ear. That also helps with comfort. It's not even just sound performance because it doesn't, put any particular pressure point by being, fixed on a, let's say, perpendicular plane. If I had to nitpick anything about the design, it's these pads love to shed, especially new. It's kind of like getting a new pair of socks, so you're going to deal with some floating pieces of lint, especially if you have a black desk setup like this. Before I get this stuff out of the way and talk about sound quality, I do want to show you the accessories. It comes with a little travel pouch. It's a very thin, plasticky type nylon material, but it has a pull string on it. It's really designed to keep the headphone from getting scratched. These are built physically well, so you can still stuff them in a bag, but there's no obvious impact protection from a case like that. You get a quick start guide that tells you how to use the headphone, but it's really just plug it in and play, and then a nice little history brochure about the backstory of Beyerdynamic and where it started from, because again, this is a 100-year celebration, so I like that they gave you a little extra card in here. It's a nice touch. Getting into sound quality, I want to start with the objective side first. It takes my opinion out of it and shows you how this headphone measures on my rig. Please do not use my measurements to compare against someone else's measurements because they don't have the same rig. Just like the human ear is unique, we all have different hearing characteristics because our pinna characteristics are different. It's kind of like an audible fingerprint. That's the same thing with measuring rigs. They are a little bit of a variance and sometimes greatly so. So I just want to keep that clear. You can use it to compare against other headphones I've measured on my site, and that'll help give you an idea of how my system hears these products. So getting into the sound quality, if you are familiar with measurements and what the typical curves are, you can see that this deviates in a few areas quite a bit. There is a little bit of a bass shelf. This is kind of a natural or common thing with closebacks. So I want to at least keep that in mind. Closeback passive headphones typically don't sound as good as an open back, which has a more natural sound characteristic. You have to deal with dampening, you have to deal with reflections, and all of these things have a negative impact on sound. So trade-offs have to be made, whether it's price, sound quality in certain areas, dynamics, clarity, all these other things. So there is a bass shelf. Most people will like the bass shelf. A lot of people in general prefer a slightly stronger bass and not neutral, and this definitely delivers that. You also can see that there's a scoop down here at about 240 hertz. I'm going to turn this off so I don't put a line everywhere. But right about 240 hertz, there is a big scoop. I don't mind that scoop as much because a little bit of a scoop is nice. It helps kind of get rid of some of the boxiness and thickness that certain bass notes have. I usually prefer less of a scoop than this. This is a little bit more extreme for me, and it can make certain bass notes sound a little bit more anemic and less punchy. There's definitely some good bass and depth to it, but it's just not, it doesn't carry forward into the mid-range as much. You can notice that dip. Now the mid-range actually isn't that bad. It's relatively close to the Harman curve, so if you're familiar with that, it's basically a generally agreed upon sound signature. You can still have your own preference, but when you compare it to some other products, this is a little bit closer to that target. Now it starts to deviate as you get close to about 2600 hertz. This is minor. You're talking 1 or 2 dB, and if everything's stopped at 2600 and below, this isn't a terrible sound signature. Where I have an issue with this particular headphone and where it measures, when you see the dip in 3 and 4K, that's fine and that's normal because our pinna gain tends to boost that area. So this is a relatively common thing that designers do. Otherwise, it can create some listening fatigue if it's too forward there. We're generally sensitive to that area, so it just comes down to personal preference. However, once you go 5000 hertz and up, this thing has a lot of treble. Beyerdynamic has kind of a sound signature of this, slightly stronger bass in this particular category. It depends on which model you pick. Relatively smooth mid-range and then emphasized treble. So this definitely doesn't hide that at all. When you compare it to something like the DT 1990, which is about, I think it's $540. It's between $500 and $600. Or other Beyerdynamic headphones known for treble, this is right up there with one of the higher, more sibilant or sharper sounding headphones. So I do want to highlight that. Now, let's get into this. So It's okay to have hearing loss. No one's going to judge you. Just because this headphone is bright and very sharp up top doesn't mean that certain people won't enjoy that signature. Some people have hearing damage and they lose upper frequency sensitivity. Some people like a lot of treble just from personal preference. And as you get older, this naturally happens. So this is still going to please a lot of people. But if you have younger hearing capabilities and you're sensitive to upper treble, there is definitely no hiding the fact that this is a fairly sharp, bright sounding headphone. Now, carrying into the subjective side, let's just stay on the note of treble while we're at it. And this thing, as I just mentioned, is very sharp sounding. It's too sharp for me personally. I'm fairly sensitive to too high of treble or too strong of treble, and this definitely causes me to wince. I couldn't really play this too much without having to do some form of EQ. I listen to it as much as I can without EQ because I really want to understand the headphone before I review it. However, it did get to a point where I had to take a nice scoop out between 6 and 8 kilohertz. Once I did that, the rest of the part, the headphone was much more tolerable. You can do some tweaks and make it more to your liking. I found that I wanted to boost some of that 3 to 4K area just a little bit to fill it in for me. But yeah, the treble is bright. There's no getting around it. I think if you're sensitive in that area, you may find discomfort in the way this sounds out of the box. Stepping down further in the frequencies, we're gonna just work backwards this time. Usually I start with bass, but the vocals are a little bit recessed. However, a lot of the vocals are relatively smooth. I don't find that they're so colored in a sense that they're not sounding the way I expect that vocal to sound tonality wise. They're just not as prominent as the rest of the mix. So depending on what you're listening to, again, EQ can kind of dial some of that up, but it's relatively smooth, but definitely unresolving. One of the benefits of that is you can listen to lower quality recordings and it will usually hide that. And if you go into higher end recordings, well, yes, they will still sound better. This may not show you every single ounce of detail you're expecting from something that's hyper detailed and resolving from more expensive headphones, but at least it delivers a relatively smooth mid-range. If not, it's stepped back a little. Now, stepping down further into the bass region, it has a sound profile that people are going to like on the bass side of things. It is elevated. Most people do like some form of a bass shelf, and it's tastefully done to where it's not overpowering everything else. I know on the curve it's going to look a little bit extreme, but when you compare it to some other consumer products out there, again, this is a passive closeback for $200, so we can't expect the sound profile to be perfect. Most passive stuff, there's some unique things we like or dislike. I don't mind this. I don't mind the scoop in that 250 hertz range. I just wish the scoop was less prominent, so maybe EQ some of that up if you find certain bass notes sounding relatively weak. You'll notice this more in like bass guitars, more so than something like, rap or a dubstep song or something that has deeper, harder hitting bass. That is totally fine on this. I actually find that because this uses that new Stellar 45 driver, which uses a copper-clad voice coil or copper-clad wire on the voice coil. This new driver is basically designed to have higher SPL capabilities before distorting. So you are getting a really good driver tech in a $200 headphone that gives you a lot of overhead. I'm saying all this because one thing I'm really going to probably drive home again at the end. This is built like a tank and it's extremely comfortable. The biggest drawback for me is the sound quality, but you can EQ some of that back. What you can't EQ is comfort and build quality. So if you compare it to another headphone that has a better sound signature, just like, the AKG 371, that's tuned exceptionally well, but it's not as comfortable and it's certainly not built as well. And over time, you may end up replacing it. Not the case with this. So I bring all that up because that Stellar driver does give you the overhead to play around with EQ a lot. Luckily, the thing this needs the most is reductive EQ. You can simply take a scoop out of the treble to make it more enjoyable to listen to, and that's not going to introduce any other distortion issues because you're actually relaxing a certain area. So it's not going to be for everybody. Again, I think the biggest summary I can make is it's not too resolving. The bass shelf is okay, and depending on what kind of music you listen to, it'll definitely fill it in nice. The biggest issue is really just the treble. It's definitely sharp and sibilant, but at the same time somehow not as detailed as you would expect with that much treble. Comparing to some other beyerdynamic headphones, I want to bring up an important point, and that's to help you identify what you're actually looking for in a headphone. Maybe you have a big collection of headphones and you just want a different flavor or a different sound profile. and this is appealing to you. Or you don't know what you want, and because this is $200 from a reputable company, you think that, hey, if I'm going to buy something, I might as well buy the newest, latest, and greatest. Well, with audio, new is not always better, and there's no fault here. I already covered the pros and cons of this, but I want to compare it to some others that are kind of interesting in this case. So you have the 1990 Pro. This is it's literally almost 3 times the price. It's 2.5 times the price. It is a much better tuned headphone, and aside from an 8K peak, you can scoop that down and you have a much more rewarding experience. This uses a Tesla driver. It doesn't use the Stellar 45 driver found in this and their $300 headphone line. I still much rather prefer the 1990 Pro. The clamp force is very much comparable. Even though it's 250 ohms, it's still relatively easy to drive, but it's an open back. So if you're just saying, you know what, I'm open to spending more to get that tonality, but I still want the beyerdynamic build quality and comfort, to me, I would go straight into the DT700s or 900 Pro X if you want closed or open, and those are about $280, or step up to the 1990 Pro, which comes with 2 different pads, by the way, as well, in addition to all the other benefits like detachable XLR, etc. The other honorable mention, this headphone gets slept on by audiophiles because it has the gaming moniker to it, but this is the beyerdynamic Tiger 300R. It's an open back, so don't expect any real noise isolation. So if you are chasing close because you want to block out exterior noise and you don't want other people to hear you, then yes, stay with a closed back, and we're going back to the whole 700 Pro X for $270 or this one for less. The Tiger 300R though is $200 and has, to me, a much better sound signature than the 770 Pro X out of the box. It sounds more natural. There's still a little bit of a treble shelf, but it's much more tame, and the bass is nice and warm and relatively linear. It boosts it in the upper bass instead of the sub bass. So if you want really strong, impactful bass, deep bass for like hip hop and EDM, then you'll still want something like the closed back with the 770. This just has a more natural sound presentation overall. I do use these a lot for gaming still, just because they're so comfortable. The cord is not detachable, kind of a bummer there, but at $200 I think it's still an exceptional product if you're open to an open back. The other honorable mention, just to throw that out there, is the Sennheiser HD6XX from Drop. This is also $200. Easily has the best mid-range tonality here. It really needs no EQ, but to a lot of people it can sound boring in a very condensed soundstage. Everything sounds like it's in the center of your head. So if you're chasing a wider sound profile, then the beyerdynamics tend to open that up more at the sacrifice of the other things I mentioned earlier, like certain tonality and sibilance. That one doesn't have the same power handling either. If you like to play it loud, then the Beyers are going to give you more power handling. This one is hilariously a good value, like exceptional value, because this has, to me, a more enjoyable sound profile, again, without EQ. This it doesn't have the same power handling as the 770 Pro X limited edition, and it's definitely not as comfortable because it switches to leatherette pads. It has a much more basic headband, but this thing is like $70 and it has a mic and it's still fully passive. So you can still get a closed back that has a different sound signature that is still agreeable. It's very comparable. This is just going to just absolutely crush it in terms of build quality and long-term comfort, durability, and all the user swappable parts. So you have a lot of options out there. I wouldn't solely focus on this, but this is good in its own right if the pros to it are what you're looking for at this price. So that about wraps up the video. I'm probably going to ask some questions. Beyer has a very strong fan following, and rightly so, because they're legendary. They've been around forever, and a lot of people have owned prior Beyer products and have had good experiences with it. This isn't going to be for everybody, as I said, but one thing that is for certain is at $200, I haven't seen a better built and more comfortable headphone. When you factor both of those scores in, this is easily at the top for some of the best you can get at this price. This feels like it will last forever. The only downside to me is the sound profile, which I would, if I were keeping these, would just do EQ to get much closer to my target. And then from there, it's a much more enjoyable headphone. So factor all that in. Hopefully this helps you decide if this is going to be your next investment or not. Thank you so much for watching and making it to the end of the video. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so I can see you at the next one, and I'll see you next time. Bye.